This is the horrifying true crime story of Dorothea Nancy Waddingham, the nurse who killed for profit. The year was 1930s Britain, a nation still grappling with the aftershocks of the Great Depression. Unemployment was high, social support systems were limited, and families struggled to care for their elderly and infirm loved ones. In a society with no universal state-run care system, it fell to relatives and private individuals to fill a growing need for long-term care. Across England, many elderly patients were kept in private nursing homes or residential facilities that offered shelter and basic assistance for a fee. These establishments range from reputable institutions staffed by trained professionals to unregulated homes run by anyone with a house and a willingness to take in paying residents. These private nursing homes helped fill the gaps left by a fragmented public system, but they also exposed a vulnerable population to risk. Despite efforts to improve nursing standards, including training reforms and the beginnings of regulated nurse registration in the early decades of the 20th century, much of the care for the chronically sick, frail, and elderly was still informal by modern standards. At times, individuals posing as caregivers could open a home with little oversight and minimal accountability. It was into this landscape that Dorothea Nancy Waddingham stepped. Married, a mother of five, and keen to make a living by offering care to the elderly and infirm, she opened a small private nursing home in Nottingham, claiming competence she did not formally possess. To many of her patients and their families, her home appeared to offer comfort and security. Dorothea Nancy Waddingham was born Dorothy Nancy Marilena Allen Chandler on 21st June 1899 on a farm near Nottingham, England. Born into a working-class family, her early life offered little indication of the infamous path her name would later take. Despite later being known as Nurse Waddingham, she never received formal nursing qualifications. Her only medical exposure came from a period working as a ward maid at an infirmary near Burton-on-Trent. In 1925, she married Thomas Willoughby Leach, a man nearly twice her age who was suffering from cancer. During their marriage, Dorothea served prison terms for fraud and theft, convictions that foreshadowed a darker pattern in her life. The couple had 3 children together before Leach's death in 1933, leaving Dorothea widowed and responsible for their family. After Thomas's death, Dorothea began a relationship with Ronald Joseph Sullivan, a World War I veteran awarded the Military Medal for gallantry. Though they never formally married, the pair had 2 children, bringing her total number of children to 5. Sullivan, devoted and supportive, assisted Dorothea in managing their household and later the nursing home they would open together. With limited financial means and a growing family to support, Dorothea and Sullivan converted their residence at 32 Devon Drive, Nottingham, into a small private nursing home for elderly and infirm patients. To local authorities, the home was acceptable, and Dorothea was viewed, at least on paper, as a competent caregiver despite her lack of formal medical training. But behind the facade of compassionate care lay a woman whose decisions would soon shatter lives and shock the nation. A woman willing to blur the line between caregiver and predator in pursuit of financial gain. At 32 Devon Drive in Nottingham, what appeared to be an ordinary residential address was anything but. Behind its modest facade lay a house converted into a private nursing home, run by Dorothea Nancy Waddingham and her partner, Ronald Joseph Sullivan. Though it lacked the polished halls of a hospital, to many families it represented hope, a place where their elderly and infirm loved ones might receive care and comfort in their final years. Unlike modern care facilities, the nursing homes of the 1930s were often unregulated private residences. With no mandatory licensing and minimal oversight, anyone with a spare room and a willingness to take in patients could operate one. In this environment, Waddingham's home was approved by local authorities as suitable, despite the fact that she had no formal nursing qualifications, and her only experience came from working as a ward maid in an infirmary. For the elderly and their families, placing a loved one in a private nursing home was an act of trust. It was an acceptance that, in a society without comprehensive state care, individuals had to seek out private arrangements for end-of-life support. When a well-off widow and her disabled daughter were referred to Devon Drive by a local nursing association for a weekly fee, the arrangement seemed legitimate, a routine solution to a deeply emotional challenge. Within those walls, Dorothea Waddingham portrayed herself as a devoted caregiver, attentive and compassionate. Families believed that their relatives were in safe hands, receiving daily assistance and companionship. Yet beneath this surface, in a place meant for comfort, lay a system vulnerable to abuse, where oversight was limited and the stakes for the vulnerable were unimaginably high. The trust placed in Waddingham and Sullivan would soon be tragically betrayed. In early 1935, two new patients were admitted to 32 Devon Drive, the modest nursing home operated by Dorothea Nancy Waddingham. They were 89-year-old Louisa Baguli, a frail widow suffering from senility, and her daughter, Ada Bagley, a 50-year-old woman plagued by a progressive and debilitating paralysis that left her unable to walk. Their care was arranged through the local nursing association, and to the outside world it seemed a reasonable solution for a mother and daughter in need of support. As the months passed beneath the roof of the Devon Drive home, an unusual change occurred. On the 4th of May 1935, Ada Baguli, fully aware of her own decline, summoned her solicitor and rewrote her will. In place of relatives and cousins who had once been named beneficiaries, Ada now left her entire estate, approximately £1,600, to Dorothea Waddingham and her partner, Ronald Sullivan, on the condition that they would continue to care for her and her mother for the rest of their lives. The new will was a startling decision, one that would raise questions about motive in the months to come. Just 6 days later, Louisa Bagley died. At 89 years old and in fragile health, her death was initially attributed to natural causes, the expected passing of someone in advanced age. A death certificate was issued and her burial proceeded without suspicion. It was the kind of outcome families, doctors, and neighbors had come to expect from elderly patients in care homes. Ada, however, remained at the nursing home through the summer. Friends visited her. One Mrs. Briggs even noted that Ada seemed in good spirits during a visit in early September, but the very next day she slipped into a coma. Waddingham called the family's doctor, who arrived to find Ada already deceased and certified the cause of death as a cerebral hemorrhage. Despite the unsettling speed of events, this too was considered plausible given her condition. It was only later, upon examination of a letter allegedly penned by Ada expressing a wish for cremation and instructing that relatives not be informed, that suspicion began to cloud what had initially appeared to be ordinary deaths. The letter and the speed with which Waddingham sought cremation would prompt Nottingham's medical officer of health to take a closer look, setting in motion an investigation that would expose the dark truth hiding behind the walls of the Devon Drive nursing home. In the wake of Ada Bagley's sudden and unexpected death on the 11th of September 1935, authorities prepared to arrange her cremation, just as she had requested in a letter dated the 29th of August. The letter, said to be from Ada herself, instructed that she be cremated and that her relatives should not be informed of her passing. The document seemed compelling at first, but something about it did not sit right with those charged with its approval. Dr. Cyril Banks, Nottingham's medical officer for health, noticed that the phrasing, particularly the clause about notifying no relatives, looked cramped and unnatural, as though added after the fact. When Dorothea claimed there were no relatives to contact, a deeper suspicion took hold. Banks refused to authorize cremation and ordered a post-mortem examination of Ada's body to determine the true cause of death. What the toxicologist found would shatter any remaining pretense of a natural passing. Dr. W. W. Taylor, senior assistant to the Nottingham analyst, detected more than 3 grains of morphine in Ada's organs, in her stomach, liver, kidneys, and even her heart. At such levels, morphine was not medicine. It was lethal poison. The discovery compelled authorities to take the extraordinary step of exhuming the body of Louisa Bagley, Ada's elderly mother, who had died months earlier. The Home Office ordered the exhumation, and Dr. Roche Lynch oversaw the post-mortem. The results were the same: morphine present in fatal concentrations, far beyond anything that would be expected even in legitimate medical use. These revelations transformed suspicion into certainty. What had been recorded as natural deaths now bore the unmistakable mark of poisoning, and the evidence pointed directly to the very person entrusted with these women's care. Investigators prepared to take the next step, arresting those responsible for these deaths. As post-mortem findings uncovered lethal levels of morphine in the bodies of Louisa and Ada Bagley, authorities acted swiftly. Detectives arrested Dorothea Nancy Waddingham and her partner, Ronald Joseph Sullivan, and charged them both with murder. Sullivan, a decorated World War I veteran who had helped Waddingham run the nursing home, was initially swept up in the scandal alongside her. The charges sent shockwaves through Nottingham. A caregiver, entrusted with the frail and elderly, now stood accused of ending the very lives she promised to protect. Families recoiled at the news, struggling to reconcile the trust they had placed in those responsible for care with the terrifying possibility of betrayal. But as the legal process unfolded, it became clear that evidence against Sullivan was insufficient. Within days, the court discharged him, leaving Waddingham to face trial alone. The community watched in stunned disbelief as the focus narrowed to a single defendant, a woman whose outward appearance of compassion now stood in stark contrast to the gravity of her accusations. In February 1936, the trial of Dorothea Nancy Waddingham opened at the Nottingham Assizes before Mr. Justice Rayner Goddard. The courtroom was packed, galleries heavy with relatives, members of the public, and press eager to witness the proceedings. Prosecutors built their case methodically. At its core was the forensic evidence of morphine poisoning. Toxicological examinations had revealed fatal doses of morphine in the organs of both Bagleys. Prosecutor Norman Burkett also highlighted the suspicious circumstances surrounding Ada Bagley's will, which had been changed to leave her estate to Waddingham and Sullivan, suggesting motive rooted in financial gain. Testimonies from medical professionals and others familiar with the Bagleys' final days underscored the prosecution's narrative. Doctors disputed Waddingham's claims that morphine had been administered on medical advice, and the sequence of events, from heavy meals on the eve of death to inconsistent accounts of care, painted a troubling picture of calculated action rather than compassionate caregiving. The evidence presented was more than circumstantial. It pointed to deliberate poisoning under the guise of treatment. As the trial progressed, the jury was left to weigh not only the scientific testimony, but also the stark contrast between Waddingham's role as caregiver and the reality that her actions may have led to the deaths of those she was paid to protect. After days of testimony and deliberation, the jury reached a decision. On 27th of February 1936, Dorothea Nancy Waddingham was found guilty of murder for the poisoning deaths of Mrs. Bagley and her daughter Ada. Despite the weight of the evidence, the jury added a recommendation for mercy, influenced in part by her status as a mother of 5 children at the time of the trial. However, neither the judge nor the Home Secretary would heed that recommendation. In accordance with a prevailing policy that rarely reprieved convicted poisoners, mercy was denied, and the sentence of death by hanging was upheld. Public reaction was immediate and intense. Outside Winson Green Prison in Birmingham, crowds gathered to protest what many saw as a deeply troubling outcome: the execution of a woman and mother. Demonstrators, numbering in the thousands, called for an end to her execution, chanting slogans like, "Stop this mother murder," in a dramatic display of public dissent. On the morning of the 16th of April, 1936, Dorothea Nancy Waddingham's sentence was carried out at Winson Green Prison in Birmingham. The execution was performed by Chief Executioner Thomas Pierrepoint, assisted by his nephew Albert Pierrepoint. Waddingham, aged 36, became one of the few women executed in 20th century Britain. Her final days were marked by intense public scrutiny. In the hours leading up to the execution, protesters remained outside the prison gates, a vivid testament to the controversy the case had ignited. Many were disturbed by the image of a mother of 5, still breastfeeding her youngest child, being led to the gallows despite the heinous nature of her convictions. In the broader aftermath, the case stirred debate not only about Waddingham's guilt, but also about capital punishment, the regulation of private care homes, and the vulnerabilities faced by elderly patients in unregulated settings. While her conviction was upheld and her execution carried out, public reaction and protest underscored the discomfort many felt at the intersection of justice, mercy, and social responsibility in Britain's interwar era. The case of Dorothea Nancy Waddingham stands as a haunting testament to how trust can be betrayed in the most chilling ways possible. A woman entrusted with the care of the vulnerable, elderly patients seeking comfort and dignity in their final years, Instead, turned that trust into an opportunity for cold calculation. In the quiet halls of a Nottingham nursing home, compassion was twisted into a mechanism of profit and death, leaving families shattered and a community in shock. Waddingham's actions, administering lethal doses of morphine to those she was paid to protect, transformed her from a caregiver into a murderer in the eyes of the law and public conscience. Her trial, conviction, and eventual execution in 1936 captured the attention of a nation still grappling with the vulnerabilities faced by the elderly and the failures of a system that allowed such exploitation to occur. Dorothea Nancy Waddingham betrayed the vulnerable in her care, turning compassion into cold calculation. Her story remains one of the most disturbing true crime stories in British history, a stark reminder that evil can sometimes wear the face of trust. If you found this story compelling or thought-provoking, subscribe for more in-depth true crime histories, comment below with your reflections, and share this video with others who are fascinated by real-world mysteries and the lessons they hold.